Welcome everybody. Thank you, Northside Lutherans and folks from Beacon and whoever is here and watching this later as well. I am Pastor Eric Hoffer, pastor at Salem on 42nd and DuPont North, and I'm really glad that we have people now from Redeemer and St. Olaf and possibly more people as well. So thank you. And we are really lucky to hear from Emily Goldthwaite-Fries, who will be presenting about Emerson Village, one of the developments that Beacon Interfaith Housing is working on getting off the ground. And so she's here to spread the word and then answer any questions we have. So Emily will go for about half hour to maybe a little bit longer, and then we'll have about another half hour or so for questions or however long we take of that time. Fantastic. Take it away, Emily.
Thanks, Pastor Eric.
Oh, and I should say, I'll monitor the chat. You don't have to worry about the chat, Emily. So I can always answer some questions if they're super brief. Otherwise, I'll make a note of them. And then when it's time for Q&A, we can turn to the chat. So if you think of a question, you can put it in the chat right away. You don't have to save it up. Otherwise, you'll be able to speak your question as well if you need to when the time comes.
That's great. And as I go, if there's a question for clarification, Eric, you can just say, hang on a second, we've got one before you go on. And then we can kind of just have more of a discussion afterwards.
Fantastic. That sounds good. But we will keep people muted during the presentation.
If everybody would like to introduce themselves in the chat right now, just tell us your name and which congregation you're from. Be fun for you to see each other there. And then later on, as we get to talk with each other, we'll hear from each other more. But I always love to see who's in the room. And the chat is kind of cool because you can all talk at once. Hi, Carol. Great. Okay. So I am Emily Goldthwaite-Fries, and I'm doing a little setting here. Yes, I'm Emily Goldthwaite-Fries, and I'm coming to you as an organizer at Beacon Interfaith Housing Collaborative. I am a United Church of Christ pastor. I've actually known Pastor Eric or members of his family for since I was in seminary. I've known members of his family, but I'm very excited to be in this role at Beacon, working with congregations all over the metro. I focus mostly in Minneapolis and working a lot with folks in North Minneapolis these days. I'm just really in love with this city and the people of this city. And I will also say that I come to this work, the piece we're talking about tonight is affordable housing development. But I also come to this work from having served churches, been a pastor where situations very often came to me, often that no one else knew about, where people were struggling to afford their housing. And sometimes in places where it might surprise folks to know that people couldn't afford their housing or were looking for someplace else that they could afford better, and finding out how little help there was out there for them. I've also had a lot of background working in shelters and knowing how long families and single adults wait in shelters often for that home that they can call their own. It's really exciting to me to work with folks just like you on creating homes that really provide that stability that shelter does not. So there are a few other folks from Beacon here. I'd like Rev Gonzalez and Rev Michael Gonzalez, and then Bob Carlson to say hi briefly. Tell us why you're here.
What do you want me to do? Say hi? Hi.
Yes. Hi, Bob. Why are you here?
I'm good, thank you. Did you want more than that from me?
Well, you are a member of Mount Olivet.
Yeah, I put it in the chat. Mount Olivet Lutheran Church of Plymouth, which is in Plymouth.
That's great. And Bob's working to connect us with Lutherans everywhere. So thank you, Bob. I'm glad you're here. And Robin and Reverend Gonzalez.
So I'm Robin Gonzalez. Emily, do you want me to share my story now or later?
Go for it.
Let's do my story now.
Yeah. Tell us
Okay.
how you came to be with us.
Hello, my name is Robin Gonzalez, and I am a North Sider. Woohoo! And I'd like to share a Northside experience I had many years ago, but it appears to be a story that people are still facing today.
Mhm.
I got married at 18, and before the wedding cake was gone, I was pregnant. By the time my child was 18 months old, I was going through a divorce. The father had already left. I needed to find a place to live. I needed a home. I was a mother. I was working full-time minimum wage. I was a student at the community college, and I was homeless living on the north side. I was fortunate to get a Section 8 voucher, but there weren't many places that were affordable who accepted Section 8. God stepped in and sent me an angel who happened to know of a landlord willing to accept Section 8. My son and I had a home. That was 44 years ago. Why did I share this story? Because it saddens me that 44 years later, there are still mothers, fathers, and families who are homeless and cannot find affordable housing. We still have people sleeping in cars, parks, and riding buses all night long with their children because they don't have a home. I am asking you to support affordable housing. Get involved the best way you can. Let our state and city representatives and legislators know how you feel. And I'm asking for your support of affordable housing. Again, I'm Robin Gonzalez. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. And Robin, you are connected with Wayman AME a little farther south in
Yes.
North Minneapolis. Yes.
Yes.
And you grew up there.
I grew up, yeah, I've been
Long time
at Wayman Church for 50, since 1963. Long time.
Thanks for sharing your story, Robin. It's
You're
really
welcome.
helpful.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rev Michael Gonzalez, and right now I am working at the Wayman AME Church in North Minneapolis. My church is actually Malone in Sioux City, Iowa. But because of the pandemic, we are unable to travel. The reason why that I am here, that I first started off with Beacon, I pastored St. James AME Church in South Minneapolis, which is the oldest Black church in the state of Minnesota. And I was there. One of the congregants came up to me, and her son was getting ready to come out of prison. And she wanted to find a place for him to live. And I said, well, let me kind of check around for you. And that was so difficult trying to find anything to be able to help her out, to help her son. At that time, Beacon was just getting ready to work on a Great River Landing. So I became a part of Beacon because of Great River Landing, which is a 72-unit place that help men coming out of prison, to give them a stable environment to be with their families. And that was truly excited. So once the Great River Landing was finished, then I just kept right on going, and we jumped into Bemosada, and that's with the Native Americans. And then we jumped right back into Emerson Village. And so Beacon has really kept me moving right along here. I also like to say that I am a member of the executive board at Beacon. And it's always a pleasure to tell the Beacon story to anyone that I meet, because it's such an important one, as Robin said, that we still have a lot of people that are paying more than 30% of what they make for housing, which is really rough when you have families. So with that being said, Emily, back to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you each for sharing a little about who you are and what brings you here. I actually think that's the best introduction to who Beacon is, because Beacon isn't someone, you know, an organization, an office building somewhere. Beacon is this collaborative of congregations, and every single one of us is here because we believe in this vision that all people have a home, and we really mean it. So I'm going to share a PowerPoint presentation, because I think a lot of the visuals that we can offer are going to make this feel a little more real to you all. And I want to make sure you're seeing the right screen. Is it there? Come on. All right. Give me a thumbs up if you can see. Beautiful family here. Okay. Yeah, so it's a good place to start, just talking about who is Beacon. Beacon Interfaith Housing Collaborative, a collaborative of more than 100 congregations now. An organization about 20 years old. The shelter arm of what we do actually goes back even more than that, over 25 years as a collaborative of congregations providing shelters in their congregations. So we have grown till today to become one of the leading developers of supportive housing in the region. And we're going to talk about what supportive housing means a little bit later. We now have 18 apartment buildings all over the metro, home to 800 households. And like I said, we've been providing shelter for over 25 years. And here's actually a picture of some folks at Wayman on kind of a fun day when they voted to join Beacon. And the picture on the left are members of Northwest Islamic Community Center, which is in Plymouth, not far from Bob's Church, also a shelter host. So here are some pictures of Great River Landing, which is the building Reverend Gonzalez was talking about, a partnership with Better Futures Minnesota, which was actually a Northside based organization, now based in the North Loop, where their offices are right there inside of Great River Landing. And we are so proud of this beautiful building and the 72 residents who live there at any given time. The services on site there have a lot to do with employment. They have a social enterprise doing demolition and construction kinds of work. And so it's an incredible opportunity for men who are mostly fathers coming back to their communities. Our shelter has actually been based on the north side for many years. The site where we plan to build Emerson Village is actually the site of a building that has been our program center for many years. And now our shelter that we're providing is really based more in Scott and Carver counties, where we are actually the only homeless shelter for families. And so we are really focusing our efforts there. And meanwhile, working to build permanent housing for families in the same place where we've been offering shelter services for a long time. So I'm actually going to forward here just a little bit so you can see where Emerson Village is going to be. You can see Broadway there just before it kind of turns toward the northwest. Emerson is right there. So it's next to, you'll recognize some of the other things at that corner. Emerge is there, Sammy's Avenue Eatery, just a lot of historic buildings and some wonderful nonprofits that are right around that area, Urban Homeworks and Juxtaposition Arts, which has actually been a tenant in our building there for a long time, but are now actually moving into an incredible new space about a block away up on that corner. So that's where we're talking about. And if you drive past it today, you'll see kind of a funky old building. In its former life, it had been, I think, a furniture store and a grocery store. It's a place a lot of Northsiders have known. It has a big mural on the side, "Welcome to North Minneapolis," that Juxtaposition artists had put on the side of that building. So it's kind of recognizable, but it's not a place to call home. And so we're really excited to be planning 40 apartments on this site for families with children, and families will be, these apartments are guaranteed to be and to stay affordable for families whose incomes are under about, this says 30,000, it's more like 33,000. That is 30% of the area median income of the whole Twin Cities. And so this is meant to be affordable for people who are struggling with rising costs of housing, who may already live in North Minneapolis right now. We are going to have 2, 3, and 4 bedroom apartments. Can you imagine finding a brand new 4-bedroom apartment that a family earning $30,000 a year could afford? We are pretty excited about this. And the other exciting thing about this model of supportive housing is that there will also be supportive services on site there in the building. So the service provider, which we will soon be announcing more information about, is going to be having offices and community spaces on the first floor of the building. And so here's kind of an example from one of our other supportive housing apartment buildings. This is a picture from 66 West, which is across from Southdale Mall in Edina. And 66 West is studio apartments for youth and young adults. I think they're like 18 to 24. And the first floor of that building has actually a little library in it, a little Hennepin County library. It has a meditation room. It has offices for case managers and the property manager who works with residents on learning how to budget, learning how to keep up their place, and how to be a renter, so that when they move on and don't need all that support, they are really ready to go. So what the picture that you're seeing there is actually like the living room area, and there's a community kitchen off to the side there. Even though all of the youth have their own kitchens and living spaces, it's important to build in spaces where community can really be built there. The name of Emerson Village is really important to us. That word village, we feel really illustrates the spirit of supportive housing and the community that can be built within a building, so that people really feel connected to their neighbors and have support. Especially, I don't think anybody, now that I'm a parent, I can't imagine how anybody raises children without some kind of village for support. And so we really want to make sure that that's built in here. There's a quote here from the director of the neighborhood organization where another one of our buildings is in South Minneapolis. This is Nicollet Square, another youth supportive housing, one of our earlier supportive housing buildings, and it still looks good as new. If you come for a tour after the pandemic is over, you won't believe that Nicollet Square is actually more than a decade old, and that hundreds of young people have gotten a new start here as tenants in this building. It's just incredible. And here's a former resident pictured here. But I love this quote from Sarah in the Kingfield neighborhood. We're happy to have Nicollet Square be part of our community and appreciate the small contribution it allows us to make to the larger issue of homelessness in our city. This is a neighborhood that really truly welcomes the neighbors who may already live in their very neighborhood, but may be kind of on the margins or invisible as they're struggling to afford it. And we all know that housing costs are really rising. So that's a neighborhood that's really excited about being able to welcome these neighbors who are likely already living in the midst, and they just don't know it. So I'm going to pause there for just a second and see if there were any questions about things that I said so far, because the next section is about how does this work and how do we get involved? What do we do? Eric, were there any questions that folks are wondering about so far?
Not in the chat, but if anyone has anything that they wanted to ask verbally, they can do that now quick. Looks like no one's unmuting themselves, so we can keep moving.
Okay, I can go on. So what's the process? There are a lot of steps to creating affordable housing and an apartment building the size that we're talking about. It takes public funding. It takes, and I think on a previous slide, it said $20 million of public investment, which would come to that particular corner of North Minneapolis. That comes from the state, from the county, from the city, from the Met Council. And it's all really important. And that's one reason why we organize. Our congregations work together and can serve as both a public witness around the importance of investing in this type of housing, but also to make sure that that neighborhood really is welcoming and informed, and that our work is informed by the people who are currently in the area, who may have thoughts and opinions and questions about this. When people see a new apartment building going up, particularly in an area where there is so much gentrification and a really legitimate fear about how housing costs are rising, it's important for us to find ways to tell the good news about how we keep this housing affordable, and that it really is a place for trying to include everyone that we can, rather than screening people out, which is what a lot of apartment buildings would do. So the next few steps that we're looking at here, we are hoping to show the NERC neighborhood that there are neighbors who are supportive, who want to see more affordable housing built here. We have some city hearings and votes, because we want to make sure that the city is both investing money from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for housing for deeply affordable apartments like this. And there's a site approval. You know, everything has to go through a zoning and planning commission hearing. We feel like we're set up really well for all of these things, but the more the merrier, because you can start to imagine how important it is for folks who live right in the area, in any part of North Minneapolis, or who live anywhere else in Hennepin County or within the metro, to be willing to use their voices to some extent, whatever you're comfortable with, as Robin was calling us to do earlier, so that we can really stand together and make sure that Emerson Village becomes a success. The ways that we are, before I move on, we've had some wonderful meetings with Councilmember Ellison and also Councilmember Cunningham, who is probably some of your council members if you live north of Broadway. So both of them are just incredibly supportive and really want to see Emerson Village come to life at 17th and Emerson. I love this quote from a meeting that we had with him. you know, some folks might treat it like a burden or a drain on a neighborhood when we start talking about building more affordable housing. And he says it's not a burden to help stabilize people in their housing. We should be honored to do such a thing. And that's really the spirit that we hope to hear from all of the decision makers who we have to call upon to make sure that we're investing in housing like this, and that a smooth pathway is made to build as soon as possible. So I have, I'm actually going to stop sharing the screen here so I can see all of you. But I want to say a little bit about how we're organizing folks around Emerson Village. And there's a link in the chat, which I hope all of you will open. If you're able to do it at the same time as we're here talking, please go ahead and do that, because that will give a chance for you to kind of add your name. It's sort of like a petition, like adding your name as a supportive neighbor of Emerson Village. And you can do that whether or not you actually live in North Minneapolis, because you'll put your address there too. And then we'll be able to send you actions that make the most sense for where you're located and who the decision makers are that you might be their constituent. We will not give your address or contact information to anybody. That's just what we use to figure out who lives right in the neighborhood, who might live in Cunningham's district, and we need to get a message to Cunningham. That's a way that you can just easily sign up and watch for emails that give you some further instruction based on where you live, kind of tailored to where you are. The kinds of things you're going to be seeing coming up might be showing up for a neighborhood meeting, or showing up into a Zoom room like this to witness a city council meeting where they're taking a vote. You also might be asked to just send a quick email that might take you less than 5 minutes, just to voice your support at one of those key decision points. All of those kinds of things really make a difference. And it is just so inspiring every time I hear from somebody who has gotten connected with us through congregations that are part of Beacon, who tells me that they're doing that for the very first time, calling their senator or calling their city council member, or finding out who's my county commissioner, and showing up to be part of a process that most of us are not watching that closely, but that has a really, really big impact in our communities. So it's really empowering to be part of those things. There's always more that you can do, as my friends who introduced themselves earlier can tell you. There will always be more ways to get involved. But even if the only thing you do is fill out that form at that link, that will be a huge contribution to making sure Emerson Village can happen. So I will just pause right there and we can talk about this. I'm curious how you feel hearing about the possibility of 40 homes for families at 18th and Emerson. What does that make you wonder about? I'd love to hear from some Salem and Redeemer folks. Are you raising your hand, Bob?
Yeah, I just thought I'd say that I've been through this process with the Cranberry Ridge property.
Right.
Cranberry Ridge is the Beacon property that's going to be built in Plymouth, and it does take a while. We had a lot of members turn out for the Planning Commission meeting that voted no on the project. Beacon went back and redesigned it. The main problem was the access to the parking lot was through the only access to a private entity next to us was through the proposed parking lot of the new building. And the city didn't like that. So Beacon redesigned the project. We went back to the city council. I want to say it was in November of 2017. We had a lot of people show up wearing cranberry to speak on behalf of the project. And the city council approved it 5-2. Which was required, that supermajority was required. So the project was blessed to go ahead, but it takes a while. It's been 3.5 years now, and Emily, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the project is now fully funded and they'll start construction in the spring. So it's I think you'll enjoy getting involved in a project like this. Just remember, it's a long haul and showing up is important. Now, whether the council would have voted 5-2 if nobody was there wearing cranberry, I don't know. But we showed a lot of support by having a lot of people showing up wearing cranberry. And then I went through a similar thing, although not near much involvement, with the proposed Vista 44 property in Hopkins. At least I showed up at the council meeting and I said, what color are we supposed to wear for Hopkins? And Hopkins athletic teams are called the Royals, so we wore royal blue if we had it. So anyway, showing that there's support from common citizens like we all are, I think does have an impact on our elected leaders.
Yeah. Bob, what difference do you think it made that there were so many people of faith coming together to speak about this in their city?
I think it matters. You know, as people would get up and speak, they would say where they live, but they'd also sometimes say the congregation they are involved with. One of our pastors spoke. I think it's always helpful to have people of faith involved and have the decision makers know that they are people of faith who are involved. So one other thing we also did, hold on just 1 second. Was we had meetings with individual city council members before they voted on the project too. Mm-hmm. And we found, at least in Plymouth, that they were approachable, and they should be. They're elected representatives.
That's right.
But we would schedule meetings with them where maybe 5 or 6 of us would represent the pro side of the project and just have a good discussion with the city council members about why we thought this was an important project for Plymouth.
Thanks. You're bringing up some really good illustrations, and Robin and Reverend Michael have been part of many visits recently with Minneapolis City Council members and some Hennepin County commissioners. There's really, and actually even some legislators. We met with Fu Lee not that long ago, and it really does make a difference. And I guarantee you, if you have ever felt like I'm sending emails or making phone calls and they go into this void and I don't know if it makes any difference, I guarantee you that they count every single comment that they get. And if you ever have, you know, an elected person representing you who's kind of on the fence, or they didn't know that this was really important to their constituents, it can really, really tip things toward justice when people of faith are using their voices and their values to make that known.
Emily, did you see Maureen's question in the chat?
Yeah. The how is this housing going to be affordable for the residents? And by the way, that also means, how is it going to be sustainable for us who become a landlord, you know, once the building is built? How do we actually, you know, pay all the costs like any other quality apartment management would do? So we actually do have Section 8 dedicated for every apartment. So families will come to Emerson Village with that income requirement of having that lower income. And it could be that families are making much less than $33,000 a year. This is housing that's really designed to work for folks who may even be coming from homelessness or unemployment, or who have been formerly evicted and had a really hard time finding something else. So this is meant for folks below $33,000 a year. And the Section 8 actually stays with the building, so that any tenant who moves into that space, it is guaranteed that the amount between what the tenant can really afford to pay and what it costs, you know, the the fair rate of the apartment is actually federal funding that comes through our city. So City of Minneapolis has already thrown in that type of support, which is a really big deal. We have some buildings where that is the piece that's the hardest to put together. And if you don't know how you're going to, on an ongoing basis, keep your housing affordable, it's really hard to convince anyone at the state to give you, $13 million for capital to get it built. And that's like, all of these pieces are kind of puzzle pieces that really build on each other. And you don't have to become an expert in any of those things just to kind of understand how many layers there are and how important it is that every piece eventually comes into place. Have we run into any opposition? Honestly, not much. Nearly everybody that we talk to already knows about the need. People are just personally experiencing an affordable housing crisis on the north side and in their own communities if they live anyplace else. There's definitely some NIMBY. Anybody know what NIMBY stands for? You can come off of mute and say it. Carol, can you come off of mute and tell us?
Not in my backyard.
Not in my backyard. Yep.
Yeah.
So, there are some misconceptions out there or negative experiences that, that might be based in something that happened, to someone that maybe they lived near an apartment building that wasn't taken care of. That can certainly happen, right? And so it's important for us to be sharing about the quality of this housing, about the services how tenants are really very, very supported. Residents are absolutely at the heart, of our mission. And that's very different than what a lot of people's conceptions might be of affordable housing, the stereotypes that they hear. Maggie, did you have another?
It just seems like such a perfect place for this. You already own the property. It's close to a park. It's close to Cub. There are a number of apartment buildings like over on Fremont that are not well run. And but this would be, so I just can't imagine that there'd be any substantial opposition from like Ascension Church or,
Yeah.
I mean, it would be a win-win, I think.
Oh yes,
for everyone.
Ascension is a great friend
Yeah.
in this. I was just talking with Father Dale Karogi, who's the priest there, just this morning, and he was just like picturing what a difference this might make for the families in the school. They have a K-8 school with several hundred families, and that brings up another just something I keep visualizing. The school, we've learned that the school that's the closest, Bethune Elementary School, 50% of the students, and this is in the public schools, 50% of the students have already experienced homelessness during their career in Minneapolis public schools. And around the whole district, that number is like 7%, which I think is extremely high to begin with, but we all know the racial disparities that exist in Minneapolis and that are rooted in policy decisions that happened a long time ago, but just persist. And so we know that an apartment building with 40 apartments, just the impact that could bring and the stability that could bring to the families at that school or at Ascension School who are moving the most frequently or who are just constantly worrying about housing. That story, Robin, that you told at the beginning here, it really is happening a lot over and over again to some families. And that's just a really exciting, makes it feel very real and also real high stakes. It's really important to make sure that we can make this happen and that it doesn't take as long as Cranberry Ridge, right? We want to kind of press forward expecting that the city will really invest and that the state will invest and that this is, really a way to address a lot of the things that people worry about. What other questions are folks having? Yeah, Eric?
to that, what you were just saying about timetable, I kind of, you gave a little bit more detail about the somewhat short-term timetable and then a super brief snapshot of beyond that. But what would be the ideal timetable for
Yeah.
things being funded, built, and people living in there?
Yeah, that's an awesome, yeah. So this spring, there's a whole bunch of action happening all at once. We make applications that only happen once a year, along with other developers who want to build similar to we do. And those applications go in the late spring, and we get decisions on those in the fall. This year that was delayed by the pandemic and so much, right? But typically it's around Halloween that we hear if we are getting capital investments from the city and the state of Minnesota. So we hope to be doing some actions this spring in order for a good outcome later this fall. Once we have the money and the permission to build it, it takes about a year from the time when we, the real estate stuff gets wrapped up, we close, and then, shovels in the ground. It takes about a year. So best case scenario is like 2 years from now, families would be moving in.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, it's way too long for the need that is there. That's,
Yeah.
but also for how development works, could be a pretty fast process.
Right.
Yeah.
The fastest that we have ever built a housing development, which is in progress right now, is Bimoseda, which really originated during the Wall of Forgotten Natives encampment. And we have a relationship with the Red Lake Nation, which Reverend Gonzalez mentioned earlier, through one of our service partners, Avivo, which does a lot of housing stability work and also chemical and mental health work with residents and trauma, work with folks who have been homeless a long time and on the street a long time. There was so much, this is a great example of how much difference it actually makes when the community keeps an issue on the front burner for those decision makers and those folks who have the power to make it happen. So there were so many things coming together at that time, the state, the city, the tribes, the nonprofits, and there was an opportunity to make sure that we could create some more housing that could be used by the type of benefits that people who are tribal members were eligible for in many cases if they've been homeless a long time, but there were not enough places for them to be. And so we bought an old apartment building downtown Minneapolis, and we're about to start construction probably next month to convert that into, for the first time in that old building, some beautiful homes that'll be permanent housing for folks who've been homeless a long time. And so that's from the fall of 2018 till now. And that is about, it's hard to picture it moving a lot faster than that. And I think a challenge to all of us is to not let ourselves be okay with that. Like, we need to make sure that that urgency is always felt, because even before the Wall of Forgotten Natives and ever since, we have an affordable housing crisis, and we have a huge crisis in homelessness in our communities. And these systems these gears that can move so slowly tend to leave people out, even without intending to do that. And knowing that it takes a few years to build an affordable housing, building like we do, but that whole time a family might be in shelter waiting for that home is really a heavy thought to me sometimes. Any other questions from folks at Redeemer or Salem? I'd love to hear what you're thinking. And Kristen is with us from Redeemer right now, but also used to work right across from me. Our desks are right next to each other. Kristen, do you want to add anything about any of this? What are you thinking? You've watched Emerson Village taking shape for a long time.
Yeah, it's
Just like
exciting
Carol
to
thinks.
see that we're gotten this far so far. Yeah. Yeah, what do I have to add? Yeah, I'm excited to see that this is moving forward. And I think something I'm just thinking about for Redeemer is we recently had a bunch of congregation members, and we're going to be having another group going through organizing training with the synod. And I think, you know, a lot of what folks learned in that can really overlap and go along with a lot of the work that Beacon is doing. There can be some symbiosis there. And then, yeah, I'm thinking also about just different ways for people to have an impact close by without a heavy lift. And I think this could be a great opportunity for that.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm kind of excited about it. And I hope we can kind of bring this back and fill more people in about it. So
Yeah,
that's kind of what I'm
great.
thinking about. But
I would be happy to send any of you our current flyer that you can just forward on to other folks. Do any of you live in North Minneapolis and think that you might have other people you could share about this with? Yeah. Are there some tools that would be helpful for you for passing on to others? Maybe this recording would help. Pastor Eric can share this with you.
Yeah, we'll put it on Salem's Facebook. Can probably, it's a long recording, so I'm not sure I want to email it, but we got some ways to share that. And then I'll make sure and when I put that in our Facebook, I'll put the link that you shared as well with the overview and potential sign on kind of thing as well.
Mm-hmm. Reverend Gonzalez, do you have anything that you'd want to add from your experiences with, or Robin, from your experiences with, you know, as a church getting involved with this?
Well, from my viewpoint, you know, with families moving forward, and Wayman hosted of 4 families to come into our church, and that was such a great experience for us. You know, we did not. You know, it bothered us that these were homeless families, but it was a blessing to us to be able to help them. And we served them food, and we worked with their children. And so at the time that everything was over with and they had left, we sat down and we debriefed. And one of the things that came out of that was that we felt like they helped us more than we helped them, because they were such warm people, and these 4 families had kind of been together for a while, and watched them take care of each other and their children and everything else. That was such a blessing just to watch that. So when we are working on Emerson Village, we look for that same type of villageness, that everyone could come in and help each other. And that's the reason why that we work hard to make sure that we can help other people, because we never know when something might strike us and we have to have someone to help us behind homelessness or whatever it might be going on in our lives.
Thank you so much. Pastor Eric, I wonder if you have any thoughts on what it might look like for Salem members in particular to connect with us.
Yeah, I mean, I really think where we're at right in the immediate term is learning more and spreading the word. And so we have a few channels that we can do that through official means, but then also just kind of tell our neighbors. And it sounds like if we do that with real intention, that actually can go a long way.
Absolutely.
And then I don't think this is like an immediate thing, but something that we can pay attention to is we serve 50 bags of food, about 100 portions of a community dinner every week. And many of the individuals who receive that food also experience some variety of housing insecurity. And so it's not quite the same, but there's room for conversation. There's room for listening. And that's the other thought. So I don't think it's like we will enlist all of the people to sign on, who come get the food, but who knows where paying attention can get us with that opportunity to listen.
Yeah. We have been hearing, especially during the pandemic, people who are really the government term for it is cost burdened, paying more than they can afford for housing, are going to need to be resourceful and look for whatever else that they can do in order to not lose that housing, right? And there's an eviction moratorium right now, possibly nationwide. Some people have, but people should not be getting evicted for lack of being able to pay right now. But in many cases, the debt that they're going to face if they lost a job at the beginning of the pandemic and are still in the same housing, they're probably going to owe, when that moratorium is lifted, the debt of all of those months of rent. And so we are working on that too. Fortunately, there's a lot of emergency rental assistance. The CARES Act and the federal government has been stepping up to that somewhat, and so is the state, with the dollars that it gets to use, putting a lot into emergency rental assistance, because homelessness really is a priority in the state. But long term, I mean, we all already know that people were struggling before this pandemic. And so we're also working on legislation that's the first time Beacon is taking the lead on legislation at the Capitol. And we have had a really successful hearing in the House. We hope to have a hearing in the Senate. We know this is going to take a long time because it's expensive. Thank you so much. Good to meet you. We are trying to establish a statewide rental subsidy program so that everybody who qualifies by their income level would have a subsidy to make up the difference between what they can afford and what it costs at fair market rate. That Section 8 program where people can get a voucher, like Robin described, currently only 1 in 4 families who qualify for that are getting it because it's underfunded at the federal level. And so we're not going to just wait for the federal government to have a huge sea change, and maybe that's coming, we don't know. But we could actually decide in Minnesota to spend a couple percent points more on housing and make sure that nobody's becoming homelessness just because of lack of being able to pay rent in their own community. So if that excites you as well, kind of going even a little further upstream or a lot further upstream, that would mean when I picture that shelter might only be for emergencies rather than a long-term stay or sort of a chronic repeating experience for families, I think we got to do whatever we can to make that happen. So I would love to talk with you all more about that later too, if, looking into next year, that might be something that would be meaningful for your congregations to be involved in. So I know that we're at our time here. I'm gonna post that link one more time and make sure that everybody has filled that out. Oh, here comes the puppy. He just woke up. And I'm also gonna put my email address. I have to stand up for this. And if you've got other questions or ideas, please feel free to reach out to me anytime. I am so, so glad that I got to meet all of you tonight. And thank you to Bob and Rev Gonzalez and Robin for coming here too. It was great to see you. The team that we have from all of these different congregations has been working for about a year on Emerson Village, and we have never been able to meet in person yet. And I feel like it's this wonderful act of resistance to all the separation of the pandemic that we can still do this work this way. So thank you for joining us in it. If you want to understand better the link, why don't we stop recording and then I can kind of explain that stuff. So I'll stay on for a minute and